Discover the incredible moment. When a housekeeper stood up for justice after a millionaire's law. Clara paused, her hands frozen on the vibrant mahogany desk cluttered with legal files and glossy brochures of luxury properties. The afternoon sun spilled through the expansive windows, casting golden rays over the office of Ben Anderson, a man who had always seemed larger than life. She had spent years within the walls of this grand home, meticulously attending to its every corner, yet today, everything felt irrevocably changed. The files spoke of deceit, backdoor dealings that preyed on workers much like her mother, bent but unbroken. Clara inhaled sharply, a wave of nausea hitting her. How had she never seen it before? The truth sat there, taunting her. The very hands that invited her to dinner and spoke sweetly about family were the architects of suffering. Her heart raced as uncertainty clashed with the memories of her mother's sacrifices, a shattering dichotomy that tightened a knot in her stomach. Clara was loyal. She loved the family that had given her a job, stability. Yet here she was, armed with knowledge that could dismantle their lives. What if they found out she knew? Would she be cast out, just like the workers they exploited? She pressed her palms against the desk, her fingers trembling. Her internal conflict screamed louder than the shrill laughter of the Anderson children in the background. The golden trappings of a privileged life closed around her, whispering questions that only bred more turmoil. Could one housekeeper truly stand against the institution that had sheltered her for so long? Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. Clara shook her head, trying to dispel the oppressive weight of the files in front of her. Yet the longer she hesitated, the more she felt a growing chasm between her reality, a life spent scrubbing floors, devoted to supporting her mother, and the potential for something greater that burned within. With Henry's guidance, the retired law professor she had met by chance, the flashes of knowledge revealed new paths, alive with purpose. He had urged her to pursue justice, but standing at the precipice of action was terrifying. As bitter confrontations brewed within the Anderson family, Clara wrestled with feelings of guilt and rage. Every evening, while she washed the dishes and wiped down the countertops, she imagined herself standing tall in court, unmasking the Andersons. A dream tinged with a reality so raw it stole her breath. What would her mother say if she knew? Would she applaud or despair? It was difficult to envision justice when living under the weight of immense sacrifice. The courtroom loomed in her mind, each day a step closer to an impending clash. She envisioned the sterile benches, the people watching, and the discomfort of having everything laid bare before the eyes of a community that often overlooked her. Could she risk everything, her job, her family stability, for the sake of exposing the truth? She could feel the tumult within her, beating like a drum, each pulse a reminder that she was fighting not for recognition, but against a vast and silent system that had validated her insignificance. Clara pressed forward, mind racing, every thought charged with impending consequences. Torn between the safety of the known and the intoxicating call of justice, she teetered on the edge of a choice that could change everything. In that moment, as her hand rested on the icy metal of the courtroom doors, a voice echoed through her mind, a calling that both frightened and compelled her, shaking her resolve. Would she step through and claim her rightful place as a voice for the voiceless, or retreat into the shadows once more, letting fear dictate her fate? The answer dangled before her like a fragile thread, ready to snap at any moment. Clara took a deep breath, the scent of polished wood mingling with the warmth from the sun. It was surreal, feeling so small in a world so elaborate and yet having the power to unravel it all. She pushed the door open, the chill of the court's air conditioning contrasting sharply with the warm sunlight outside. As she stepped in, the reality of her choice became palpable. The stakes were higher than ever. Seating herself among the spectators, Clara tried to steady her heart. Each synchronous tick of the ornate clock echoed like a drum, matching the thrum of her anxiety. Henry had emphasized the importance of preparation. She needed to have her story clear, to draw from the well of her experiences without faltering. Yet today, her motivation faced a brutal test. The gavel struck, and the proceedings began, erasing all warmth from the room. She watched the lawyers, poised and polished. The defendant, Ben Anderson, sat solidly framed by legal ironclad defenses, his calm demeanor hardly matching the accusations she knew were true. Distant memories of her mother echoed in her mind, stories of hard work, of being a woman of strength. Fighting overwhelming odds wasn't new to Clara, it was who she had been raised to be. As the testimonies began, Clara listened intently, recognizing the voices of those who had long been silenced. She squirmed as she heard the heartbreaking accounts of brutal working conditions, families torn apart by neglect, and jobs lost without reason. It stirred a fire within her, breathing life into her dormant instincts. This was not just about her, but about all the invisible threads that wove through society, binding people into a struggle for justice. The sound of a woman's voice brought Clara's attention back to the present. One of the former housekeepers spoke, her voice shaky yet resolute. "I just wanted to do my job," she said, tears glistening in her eyes. "But they treated us like we were less than human." With each word, Clara felt the palpable weight of resentment growing in her. A dark realization pressed down on her. She had lived in the boundaries of this injustice, making her complicit. After the hearing, Clara found a small group of supporters gathered in an adjacent room. They whispered, nodding toward materials that offered insight into the case. She mingled, grappling with her fears while absorbing their determination. The people around her had transformed disbelief into empathy, and her heart flooded with hope. Would they accept her if she stepped forward? It felt like a war torn with binary options, loyalty to the Anderson family or loyalty to herself. Finally, her heart thudded against her chest as she realized something else. Her stormy thoughts centered on more than just the Andersons. They pointed towards her own evolution. What if she embraced her role not just as an observer, but as a catalyst? Her fingers trembled slightly with resolve. Clara knew she could not stay silent. The thought of her mother's sacrifices began to interlink with the names of those who had suffered under the same banner. Each day she spent spinning her wheels in fear was another day wasted from advocating her truth. She made a silent vow to return, not just as a victim, but as an advocate. Leaving the courthouse, she felt a shift within her, a spark ignited by the realization of her own voice. The pull toward action was overwhelming, beckoning her to unveil the truth. As she took her first steps down the marble steps, the echo affirmed her decision. The time had come to face her fears head-on, to flip the narrative from one of victimhood to that of activism. It promised a path riddled with uncertainty, but also an opportunity for growth. The oppressive weight of indecisiveness began to lift, replaced by a newfound strength. But as she walked away, a shadow caught her eye. It was Ben, approaching with an expression of steely determination. Clara felt her heart race. This confrontation could shatter everything she had worked for. She halted, caught between the desire to flee and the urge to stand her ground. What would this encounter reveal? Would she find her strength, or was this just the beginning of the fight? Clara squared her shoulders, instinctively affirming her decision. The looming figure of Ben Anderson felt like a storm cloud brewing overhead. It was jarring. He had been a part of her past, emblematic of privilege and power. The recollection of his easy laughter, wrapped in a charm that camouflaged cruelty, surged through her. But this was no longer about nostalgia. It was about truth. "Clara," he called, his tone smooth, yet carrying an undercurrent of menace. She swallowed hard, the flutter of fear clashing with the quickening pulse of conviction. This was the moment she had anticipated and dreaded. "Ben," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. The air between them crackled as he stepped closer, invading her space as if he believed the gravity of his presence could intimidate her. "I heard you in there," he said, an inflection in his voice that raised every hair on her body. "You're being naive if you think you're going to make a difference." His words dripped with condescension, and Clara could sense the underlying threat cloaked in his confidence. "I might just surprise you," she retorted, clinging to the new resolve that had ignited her purpose. It was unnerving but also liberating to stand her ground, even as doubt whispered in the corners of her mind. Ben smirked, yet something darker flickered in his eyes. Your little voice? It won't change a thing. The system is built to protect people like me. You're still just a cog in the machine. Each syllable felt like a blow, aimed directly at her effort to believe in agency. Yet the words could not retract the truth she had unearthed. There was danger in his dismissal, one that she could no longer afford to ignore. You think you're invincible just because of your name? She replied, the conviction in her tone gaining momentum. But every story has a breaking point, and your reign will not remain unchallenged. His posture shifted, the playful banter dropping into a steel-like focus. Be careful, Clara. You're treading on shaky ground. For a moment, doubt slipped into her thoughts. What would it mean to expose someone like him? Aiming for justice demanded undeniable courage. But Clara clenched her fists, the heat of defiance burning away the hesitation. She took a half-step forward, lessening the distance between them, fueled by a sudden surge of empowerment. You can silence voices, but not the truth. It's alive, it's growing, and you can't outrun it. The weight of those words felt monumental, as though she were casting the first stone in a clear declaration of war. For the first time, uncertainty crept into his demeanor. You think you're special. His bravado cracked slightly, revealing a vulnerability that Clara had never encountered before. Yes, I am, she asserted, her voice unwavering. I will not let your actions pass without scrutinizing them or seeking justice. You may have the courts and the money, but I will have the truth. A silence lingered between them, electric and anticipatory. In that moment, Clara confronted not just Ben but her own fear, a tether to her past that she now understood held no power over her future. She could harness that strength she had always carried, evolving from the shadows into the light. Yet as Ben's expression shifted from arrogance to apprehension, she wondered if she had unleashed something more frightening than she realized. Clara could feel the stakes escalating, turning a mere conversation into a battlefield. Remember this moment, Clara, he warned, turning away but not before the final word hung in the air like an unspoken threat. You'll regret it. Clara stood frozen for a split second, the lifeblood of her determination rushing through her veins. Regret was a luxury she could no longer afford. As she turned on her heel, her mind buzzed with ramifications. The fight had officially begun, yet what lay ahead was undefined territory, where courage would meet consequence. The courtroom was just the beginning. New questions saturated her thoughts. What allies existed in the shadows? Who could she trust? And how deeply could she dig before uncovering dangers greater than her current understanding? This was just the dawn of her reckoning, and she could sense the tempest brewing. The echoes of a battle for justice had been ignited, but the true test loomed ahead. Would her resolve withstand the fierce backlash awaiting her? Clara walked briskly down the corridor, her mind swirling with the implications of her confrontation with Ben. The building hummed with life around her, but she felt insulated from it, separated by a burgeoning sense of purpose. Each footfall infused her with the enormity of what lay ahead, a fight that would test her resilience and faith in her own convictions. In the dim glow of the fluorescent lights, she reflected on her next moves. The initial confrontation had left her exhilarated, yet the reality of her situation began to blunt that edge. The words exchanged were just the prelude. What strategies could she employ to gather the evidence necessary to confront not just Ben, but the entirety of a system that shielded him? Clara clenched her jaw as memories of her past flooded back. How many years had she spent relegated to the periphery? Working as a housekeeper, she had learned to observe without being seen, an expert in detecting shadows of injustice. She recalled the countless conversations overheard, scraps of information exchanged in hushed tones, the whispers that painted a far different picture than the polished facades of her former employers. An unexpected clarity surged within her. Those very observations were now ammunition, ready to be wielded in the battle against someone like Ben. She found herself reflecting on her hidden capabilities. The meticulous attention to detail honed in a life of servitude could be vital to unearthing the truth. Instead of being just a cog in the machine, she realized she had the power to become an architect of change, mapping out the very weaknesses of the system. A sudden wave of determination washed over her. The Human Resources Department at the estate, she thought. Exiting the building, she instinctively headed toward her car, a modest vehicle that symbolized her new beginning. The thought of approaching former colleagues filled her with trepidation, but the weight of complacency ignited urgency. These individuals had stories, secrets that needed to be shared, truths that could bend the armor surrounding the elite. As she drove, Clara recalled a yearning to connect deeply with others who had been similarly affected by Ben's actions. Who could she trust? Fostering alliances was essential, yet she had to tread carefully. There was no room for missteps. One wrong move could put her in the crosshairs of danger. Arriving at her destination, Clara parked and took a deep breath, steadying her nerves. She envisioned the faces of those who had still remained at the estate, still vulnerable to Ben's control. Would they be receptive to her call for action? This was uncharted territory. Reaching out could either solidify her mission or amplify her isolation. Pushing the door open, she quickly walked up the steps to the building. Her determination was palpable. She would not allow fear to dictate her next chapter. The weight of her request could bring unity or splinter the remnants of relationships, but Clara understood the potential for empowerment lay within collaboration. Entering the building, she headed toward a small gathering area where a few familiar faces loitered, subdued by the day's monotony. "Hey, everyone," she said, her voice infusing warmth into the chilled atmosphere. Their heads turned toward her, expressions shifting from surprise to curiosity. "What's going on, Clara?" one colleague asked hesitantly, uncertainty tinged with a flicker of hope. "I need your help," she began, taking a bold step forward, the words pouring from her lips, fueled by the recognition that her truth could spark the revelation each of them desperately needed. As they began to gather around, Clara comprehended that her moment of truth had arrived. Every heartbeat resonated with the urgency of the mission. But as she prepared to reveal the intricacies of her plan, a chilling thought stopped her cold. What if Ben had been watching? The tension in the air became thicker, suffused with possibilities, as Clara's mind raced. A single question resonated within. Could trust be forged in the fires of fear, or would it ultimately be shattered by betrayal? Clara took a moment to steady her breath, grateful for the support of her colleagues, yet painfully aware of her vulnerability. She scanned their faces. Some were familiar, others distant specters from her time in the estate, each expression brimming with uncertainty and unspoken histories. Their eyes, wide with confusion mingled with curiosity, reminded her just how fragile the fabric of trust could be. "I need you to listen," she said, her voice firm, piercing the air like a clarion call. The urgency in her tone compelled the colleagues to dim their murmurs. It was now or never. Clara was no longer just a housekeeper. Today, she stood as a sentinel against Ben's tyranny. The way things are now, they're headed for a breaking point. Ben is not as invincible as he seems, but to expose him, we need evidence, proof of the wrongdoings that lie hidden beneath the surface. She felt the weight of her words as they landed, gauging the flickers of concern and intrigue that flared in their eyes. A woman named Maria, her former friend, spoke up first. "But Clara, what if he finds out? He has eyes everywhere." Anxiety draped her voice, as if the very idea of challenging the status quo sent waves of fear rippling through her. Clara squared her shoulders, the fireplace of their shared memories igniting her resolve. "I understand, Maria. I used to think that way too. But think about the nights we spent in secrecy, whispering about the things we saw and heard. Those conversations were never just idle chit-chat. They were cries for help, for recognition. We can't keep letting fear dictate our every move." The words hung in the air, challenging their instinctual reservations. She could see some reacting, their frowns softening as they leaned in, captivated by the hopeful flicker ignited in her voice. "Each of you has pieces of the puzzle that could unfold the truth. I've been plotting a way to connect our experiences, to gather notes, to document everything. If we work together, we can create a file, concrete evidence." Clara felt the energetic pulse of her own proposal, the call to arms igniting the very spirit that had once been stifled beneath servitude. Her colleague James, a disgraced former head of maintenance, nodded slowly. "I've seen things," The negligence, the cover-ups. If we can compile this, we might have a shot. A tremor of enthusiasm began to course through the group, a shared understanding of the power of their combined voices against a singular enemy. Yet doubt remained interwoven through their resolve. Clara could see it in their reluctance to fully commit. A gnawing sense of doubt clawed at her, threatening to undermine the fragile alliance she was trying to forge. She needed to reassure them of the strength in their unity, not just the strength they might hold as individuals, but as a collective force, no matter how small. "What if we met after hours?" she proposed, her heart racing at the thought. "We can come together, each bring our notes, and share our stories in safety. We need to create a plan from the ground up." Silence fell again as they absorbed the weight of this suggestion. Clara could feel her heart pound, the potential for change mingled with the fear of unraveling their lives further. But as the clock's ticking permeated the air, she understood the pivotal moment they all faced. When Maria finally nodded, a subtle determination glowed in her eyes. Others followed suit with hesitant affirmations. As they committed verbally, Clara sensed the metamorphosis of doubt into resilience. But just as camaraderie seemed to blossom, Clara's instincts surged, a deep-seated terror rising within her. They needed to keep their voices low, shadows hiding her words, for the walls had ears, and retribution was often swift. The thought slashed through her mind like lightning. How could she protect her newfound allies from Ben? Could she fortify their resolve when her own was still being tested? Clara's mind reeled as the possibilities unfurled. The stakes had escalated, and now she would need to confront not just the consequences of her actions, but also the sheer depth of her commitment to justice. As the buzzing energy of their discussion swelled, a new thought flickered within her. What would she truly risk to bring Ben down? The danger crept in, uninvited but insidious. Meanwhile, a question stirred deep in her consciousness. Would she be the catalyst for change, or would fear fracture their alliance before it even began? Could the fragile web of trust they'd begun to weave survive the tempest they were about to unleash? Clara knew she had to navigate this tightrope skillfully, or risk losing everything she'd fought for. Clara spent the next several hours stewing over the potential fallout of their decision to meet privately, busily cataloging every detail that could lead to opening Pandora's box. She paced the quiet confines of her small, sparsely furnished bedroom, recalling each piece of information exchanged during the day. Every whisper, every cautious nod would intersect with the memories of their past lives, beneath Ben's watchful gaze. As night crept in, shadows formed in the corners of her room, cloaking the remnants of her former self. She was torn between the woman she had been, a compliant servant, and the force she was becoming, one that posed a direct challenge to Ben's reign. Could she even capture the essence of both identities without losing herself entirely? Panic bubbled within her as the clock ticked toward the hour of their first meeting. The moment Clara stepped into the dimly lit pantry, chosen as their clandestine meeting place for its isolation, she felt an unexpected surge of adrenaline coursing through her veins. Each colleague arrived bearing their own tapestry of fears and hopes, woven tightly together. Clara's gaze swept over them. She studied their faces, seeking unspoken courage amid the reflections of vulnerability. "Thank you all for coming," she began, firming her stance. The gravity of the situation rippled in the air. "We can't afford to underestimate Ben. He thrives on our fear and silence, but each of us carries vital stories that can expose the truth." Maria sat quietly, her fingers nervously tapping against the tabletop. "And what if that truth leads back to us? It could cost us our jobs, or worse." Clara could feel the tremor of doubt in her voice and in the room. It stirred a flicker of doubt in Clara's own heart, but deeper still was a determination kindled by the stories they shared in secret. "We are already at risk, Maria. Continuing in silence only emboldens him. We can document our experiences, meetings, misplaced items, suspicious maintenance requests. We will have something tangible." Clara's thought leaped to the courage radiating from moments of shared laughter amid their hardships. Perhaps those bonds could be reforged into something unbreakable. James spoke up, his deep voice cutting through Clara's rising tension. "I overheard Ben discussing budget cuts for safety standards, things that could put lives in danger. If we could capture those instances, we might finally bring him down. His mention of precarious decisions ignited flickers of resolve within the group. Clara pressed forward, steeling herself. So, let's start tonight. Take out your notebooks. Document everything. Every piece of information we gather strengthens our case. As they reluctantly opened their notebooks, Clara admired their resolve even as she wrestled her own doubts. The camaraderie they had built felt fragile, a web delicately spun from whispers and shared glances, but she sensed it strengthening with each cautious stroke of pen against paper. Yet, somewhere deep inside, Clara wrestled with a growing unease. They were formulating a strategy to expose Ben, but could she truly protect the people gathered around her from the man whose ruthlessness was legendary? What if, upon uncovering the truth, Ben retaliated with a vengeance harsher than any of them could foresee? Outside, the moon hung like an ominous watchman, while whispers of this new alliance danced dangerously close to the ears of those who might betray them. Their collective murmurs filled the pantry, oscillating between the palpable thrill of action and the suffocating grip of fear. Clara realized she was standing at the precipice of a shift not just for them, but for her own identity. In that moment, a daunting realization pierced through her thoughts. She wasn't merely piecing together a scheme to dethrone Ben. She was unraveling her very sense of self, transforming the woman who had once bowed under the weight of disapproval into a fierce advocate for justice. But even amid that fierce determination, she couldn't shake the burgeoning sensation that the time would come when they'd be put to the test, and the stakes would be more than just their jobs or reputations. It would be their lives. As they prepared to chart their evidence-gathering paths, Clara looked around the dimly lit room. A single thought solidified in her mind. It was now or never. Would her courage hold through the storm they had begun? Clara grappled with her decision long after the meeting had concluded. The gravity of the pact she had formed loomed large, pressing against her chest as she walked back to her bedroom. Each step felt heavier, burdened by the enormity of what they were about to undertake. She didn't just feel a shift in her role. She felt the weight of an entire community's hopes resting squarely on her shoulders. Once alone, she sank into the small chair at her desk, the dim light barely illuminating the papers scattered before her. Notes from the meeting spilled over the surface like the emotions swirling within her, anticipation intertwined with anxiety. The commitment to action was alive, tinged with a dangerous thrill. Clara took a deep breath, trying to ground herself before diving into her next steps. What would her next move be? Lists cluttered her mind, identifying patterns in Ben's behavior, alerting others about safety violations, and careful documentation. The thought of becoming this version of herself, a whistleblower, both exhilarated and terrified her. There was a part deep down that craved recognition, but would she find it at the expense of her vulnerability? Hours slipped away as she pored over her notes, piecing together glimpses of Ben's manipulative tendencies. Each observation revealed a calculated cruelty lurking behind his polished exterior. As she meticulously detailed his comments about budget cuts, Clara felt a flicker of purpose igniting within her. Maybe, just maybe, her insights could be the key to unraveling the multitude of lies. Yet that flicker dimmed with the nagging realization that one misstep could cost everyone dearly. Families depended on their jobs. Her heart sank as she thought of Maria's 2 young children, innocent in this chaos. Could she justify risking their livelihoods for something that could blow up in their faces? The delicate balance of change weighed heavily in her thoughts, each potential outcome a reminder of what lay ahead. As dawn broke, a determined wave swept over her. She rolled her shoulders, shaking off the remnants of doubt. Revisiting the notes, Clara sensed the burgeoning power of a collective struggle. She wasn't merely documenting a betrayal, she was weaving a counter-narrative, a story that demanded to be told. She had the ability to craft something not only for herself, but for those who remained voiceless in the shadows of Ben's dominion. In the days that followed, Clara took on the duality of her life with renewed vigor. She would quietly engage with colleagues, gauging their observations about Ben's operations. But as she navigated through the workplace, a chilling realization surfaced more consistently. There were those in the organization who had been waiting for someone to spark a change. Their quiet hope bolstered Clara's resolve. The risk became palpable with each interaction. Their discussions and hushed tones felt electric, but Clara couldn't dismiss the looming threat of Ben's retaliation. A devilish cunning swirled around him like a storm cloud, and she now understood that he would not surrender his control easily. One evening, after a particularly tense day, Clara received an unexpected message slipping under the door of her apartment, a simple note that read, "Be careful, he knows." Her heart raced. The words felt like a spear aimed at the very core of her burgeoning defiance. Who had the audacity to warn her? And knowing Ben, was this a trap? Another layer of manipulation? Clara's breath caught in her throat. This was her pivotal moment. Would she retreat in fear or push back against the suffocating darkness? The decisions made in the coming days would redefine who she was becoming, courageous crusader or fearful servant. And in the quiet stillness, amidst her swirling thoughts, she knew the stakes had intensified. With the path ahead dangerous and fraught with shadows, Clara's journey into the unknown was just beginning. As dawn approached again, a fierce determination ignited in her chest, each beat fueled by a paradoxical thrill. But what would her next confrontation reveal? Would she have the courage to face Ben head-on, or would his retaliation shatter the fragile trust she had begun to foster? Clara awoke the next morning with a tension coursing through her veins, the weight of the warning note drumming ominously in her mind. As she prepared for the day, each movement felt deliberate, calculated. This was no longer routine. She was a soldier preparing for battle. Every decision mattered now. She donned her outfit, not for appearances but as armor against the hostile world that awaited her in the office. The office loomed ahead, its sterile walls seemingly more oppressive than before. Clara steeled herself, conjuring images of the families relying on her courage. She had to engage everyone with a calculated vulnerability, fostering trust while protecting her own interests. As she entered the building, she kept her head high, though doubts whispered in her ear, warning of Ben's wrath. Throughout the morning, Clara's mind raced. She had gathered snippets of information and patterns in Ben's manipulative tactics, yet how could she piece together evidence without attracting attention? The informal conversation she had crafted carefully with her colleagues had turned into an exchange of hopeful glances and unspoken resolve. The pact she felt with them now felt like a network woven from shared oppression. Lunch was a critical moment. Clara saw her opportunity, a quiet corner of the cafeteria where whispers could fill the void. She approached Maria, who was seated with a few other coworkers. "Can we talk?" Clara asked, both anxious and eager to stoke the flame of collective courage. "Haven't you heard?" Maria's voice was laced with concern. "No one speaks against Ben. He's dangerous." "I know," Clara replied, steadying her resolve. "But we can't stay silent. If we do, we're letting him win." A flicker of recognition passed through Maria's eyes, the unspoken bond of shared fears cracking open the chamber of vulnerability. "What do you suggest?" Clara leaned closer, heart racing. "Let's document his actions. We need to keep a record, dates, incidents, conversations. If we gather enough evidence..." Maria's hand trembled slightly, but she nodded. "You're right. If he's cornered, maybe he won't just be able to control everything." The conversation shifted gears as they began pooling experiences, each story illustrating their living nightmare under Ben's icy grip. Clara felt exhilaration rise within her. This wasn't a solitary endeavor. They were building a collective history of resilience. In that moment, Clara discovered a strength within herself she hadn't known existed. A strategic mind capable of threading individual testimonies into a coherent message. She felt herself grow more adept, each word she uttered forging a renewed sense of purpose. But as the day wore on, Clara's heightened resolve came crashing down with a jarring realization. Each moment of solidarity brought with it an equally rising risk. The walls felt as if they were closing in. The tension could cut through the air as she caught sight of Ben in his office, a hawk surveying his territory. His piercing gaze seemed to settle on her, an icy challenge barely masked by a smile. "Don't make a mistake, Clara." The memory of his voice rumbled in her mind. She shivered, but resisted the urge to look away. As the evening shadows lengthened, Clara retreated to her apartment, shadowed by the weight of the decisions made. Tangible dread coiled within her. With the note still haunting her thoughts, she questioned the level of vigilance required to navigate this dangerous new path. Each passing moment deepened her awareness of Ben's capability for deception and manipulation. Determined, she opened her laptop and began documenting the evidence, her own narrative of truth, one whisper at a time. But what if Ben retaliated before she could act? The stakes were rising, and as Clara typed, she realized she was no longer just documenting a betrayal. She was crafting her own story of survival. And yet, with each keystroke, she could not shake the nagging sensation that her every move was being observed. Who could be trusted? As she prepared to confront what lurked in the dark corners of her reality, she sensed that Ben was growing aware. The time for ambiguity was slipping away, and soon she would have to confront the very threat that hovered over her newfound purpose. Would she be ready when it came? The dawn broke with the same oppressive weight weighing heavily on Clara's chest. Each tick of the clock echoed in her mind like a countdown to an inevitable confrontation. What had once been the familiar cadence of office life now morphed into a dissonant reminder that every interaction held the potential for conflict. She dressed meticulously, her fingers smoothing out her blouse, hoping it would bolster her resolve. Yet beneath the surface, an undercurrent of anxiety rippled through her as she prepared to face Ben. Clara's internal dialogue had shifted during the quiet hours of the night. No longer just a narrative of survival, it had transformed into a calculated plea for justice. The fear that once immobilized her now stoked her determination, making her almost hyper-aware. As she stepped into the office, her senses heightened. Every whisper, every subtle glance assessed for betrayal or solidarity. Clara's heart raced as she watched her co-workers, their eyes reflective of shared burdens and a quiet storm brewing beneath polished exteriors. The morning dragged, each meeting filled with the usual ebb and flow of corporate jargon that felt increasingly hollow. Clara's mind was elsewhere, piecing together the puzzle of Ben's manipulations. She took notes discreetly, snippets of conversations dripping with unspoken fear and discontent. The act of documenting had ignited a flame within her, a visceral need not just to protect herself, but to ignite a movement among the oppressed. When lunch arrived, she felt the weight of purposeful silence in the cafeteria. Anxiety twisted in her stomach as she approached Maria again, reheating their pact. "We need to be ready," Clara urged. "Let's meet after work to see what we've all collected." Maria's eyes darted around the room, ensuring no one was within earshot. "If we're found out, Clara, you don't know what he's capable of." "No, but I'm beginning to." Clara's voice lowered, her resolve fortifying under the pressure. "We're so close to the truth, and if we don't act, his power goes unchecked." As they discussed their gathered evidence, Clara felt adrenaline coursing through her veins, each piece of information becoming a weapon found in a long, silent battle. The stakes grew higher. She grasped the magnitude of what they were risking. This became more than just about survival. It was about justice, about reclaiming their agency. Back at her desk, she sat frozen momentarily, a sudden realization hovering above her consciousness, a pivotal moment that was both exhilarating and terrifying. Clara possessed the ability to challenge the established order. She grasped the pen tightly, breathing deeply as the weight of what she was about to undertake loomed in her mind. Engaging in this fight required her to confront not only Ben but the darkest parts of herself, the self-doubt, the fear of failure. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, muscles tense, as she meticulously crafted an outline, organizing testimonies into coherent bullet points. The task was deceptively simple, yet she could feel the translations of fear into strength vibrate through her. However, as the afternoon wore on, the oppressive atmosphere thickened. The watchful eyes of colleagues and Ben's piercing gaze combined to create an unbearable pressure. She pondered if this alliance could withstand the scrutiny. As evening approached, Clara met with Maria and a couple of others in a dimly lit cafe nearby. Their conversations, once tentative, bristled with excitement and resolve. They shared stories and strategies, each voice acting as a thread, weaving into a new tapestry of courage. Clara's heart swelled with hope, but an accompanying dread gnawed at the edges of her mind. This newfound power was still tinged with trepidation. Would they be able to act before Ben sensed the encroaching storm? Despite her outward confidence, she still relied heavily on the thoughts of self-doubt creeping in. Shaking off the feeling, Clara resolved to stay focused. The plan was coming together, turning abstract dreams of resistance into actionable, documented evidence. Yet as she looked around the table at her allies, an urgent knot formed in her stomach. What if one of them faltered in the face of Ben's retaliatory tactics? Each moment of courage could just as easily become a moment of weakness. The equilibrium of this fragile piece felt like a razor's edge. They were all walking a tightrope. As Clara departed into the darkness, shadows loomed larger, stretching ahead of her like a harbinger of impending conflict. Would her alliance stand firm when faced with the storm that was approaching? The evening felt electric, and the promise of confrontation hung in the air. Could she harness the energy born from fear and transform it into action before it was too late? Clara knew she was on the brink of a profound transformation, and as her resolve solidified, she whispered to herself, the time had come to face him. Clara stepped out into the dimming twilight, the cool air cutting sharply against her skin, both refreshing and alarming. Tonight, she was no longer just a housekeeper or a passive observer. She was a woman on the brink of change, preparing for a confrontation that could redefine every aspect of her life. The faces of her colleagues flashed in her mind, their tentative hope and fear intermingled as they gathered notes, ready to unveil the heart of Ben's operation. The confrontation with Ben was not merely an external challenge, it also represented an internal reckoning. Clara had spent so much time bowed beneath the weight of his authority, but now, as she walked purposefully towards the office after hours, her shoulders squared with resolve, she was determined to reclaim her narrative. The office was eerily silent, illuminated by the sparse light of the desk lamp in Ben's corner office. As she approached, Clara steeled herself. No longer would she allow the memories of her former submission to steer her heart. Fear had no place in her new identity. Opening the door, she stepped inside, forcing the shadows to recede. Ben looked up, his expression shifting from casual confidence to startled recognition. "What are you doing here, Clara?" he asked, voice smooth but edged with tension. "I'm here to put a stop to your behavior." Her words came out firm, echoing in stark contrast to the uncertainty that once haunted her. Ben leaned back in his chair, a slow smile spreading across his face as he assessed her. "You think you can just confront me after so many years of silence?" "I was silent because I was afraid," Clara replied, unyielding. "But not anymore. I've seen the lives you've ruined, the people you've exploited, and I won't allow that to continue." His laughter cut through the air, cruel and dismissive. "What do you think you can do? You're just a cog in the machine. You have no power." The disbelief in his voice rattled her momentarily, but the gathering strength of her allies surged inside her. "You're wrong. Change is possible when people choose to stand together. Your tyranny ends here." Ben rose to his full height, towering over Clara, but she didn't flinch. The tension in the room thickened, a battle of wills where his arrogance began to falter. "I suggest you back down before it costs you dearly. People like you can easily be discarded." Clara narrowed her eyes, a new fire igniting within her. "You underestimate the people you've silenced. Your empire of intimidation is crumbling. This is where your story starts to unravel." As the clock ticked menacingly, they each felt the weight of fate pressing around them, a palpable tension hanging in the air. "And how do you plan to do that?" Ben taunted, regaining a semblance of composure. She reached into her bag, pulling out her meticulously organized files, the testimonies, the evidence of misdeeds, the documentation she and her colleagues had compiled together. "I've gathered what I need. It's time for the truth to be known." The surprise on his face was a welcome sight, the realization dawning that perhaps Clara was not the insignificant cog he had always believed her to be. "You think these papers mean anything to me? You think they'll make a difference? They will. And not just to you, but to everyone suffering because of your actions. There's a whole system of support behind me now, Ben. You're no longer safe." The air shifted, charged with the potential for change. The confrontation transformed from one of fear to one of liberation. Clara understood in that moment that she was not merely fighting for herself anymore, but for all those who had been mistreated and overlooked. His bravado slipped as Clara turned her back and walked towards the door. "You have your empire, but know this," she declared, voice steady. "From now on, I won't just be part of your background anymore. I will expose the truth, and you will answer for your misdeeds." As she left the office, resolutely clicking the door shut behind her, a surge of adrenaline coursed through her, the thrill of having stepped into her truth. The labyrinthine network she had woven with her colleagues now felt tangible, powerful. They were not just whispers in the shadows anymore. They were voices ready to be heard. Clara emerged outside, taking a deep breath as the weight of tension lifted from her shoulders. The air felt lighter as the darkness receded. She could now envision a future built on courage and transparency, not one where fear reigned. The threat from Ben remained prominent, but she understood now that she had transformed from a housekeeper into an advocate for justice. As she rejoined her allies, Clara felt recognized and competent, a position she had always aspired to hold. The threads of change had been tangled before, confronting challenges that seemed insurmountable, but now she wore her strength like armor, fortified by collective resolve. That evening marked not just a confrontation, but the dawn of a new chapter, where Clara no longer needed to hide in the shadows. As she rallied her colleagues around her, she saw their faces filled with hope, their union redefining what could be accomplished together. Solid confidence radiated from her, reflecting her growth and transformation from an observer of injustice to a truly empowered individual ready to confront challenges head-on. Now was the time. Each of them would stand united, disrupting the silence that had stifled their lives for too long. They were committed, not just to exposing Ben's corruption, but to reclaiming their dignity as individuals. Clara had achieved not just justice, but her own deserved recognition as a leader in this fight. In that moment, as her heart raced with a mixture of anticipation and certainty, she knew they would rise, creating narratives that celebrated strength, unity, and transformation. The stage was set. The fight for truth had only just begun, and together, they would prove that justice could be reclaimed, one courageous step at a time. Now, you need to subscribe immediately to the channel to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm. Your support makes a difference. Comment your reactions and theories about the ending. Every voice matters. Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. Don't wait even one more second to share. Only true fans of personal overcoming stories understand the power of support.